collapse of the world's power structures. Did this in 1980. Later, the Soviet Union collapsed. Just went to dust like one of the Twin Towers. And it didn't collapse because of the Reagan's much vaunted military buildup. It collapsed, as Professor Antal Fekete said last week in Dallas, because of inherent economic contradictions. There are rules to our planet. There are rules to life. There are rules to economics. You violate those rules for long enough, your economy is going to collapse. You violate natural rules long enough, you're going to collapse. The Soviet Union was built on a hodgepodge of theories, as I like to say, made up of schnapps and an anti-imperialistic attitude late at night. Collapsed. But I want to remind you that Bucky's introduction was titled not The Collapse of the Soviet Union. It was entitled The Collapse of the World's Power Structures. Well, I said last summer, I delivered a talk in Budapest in Hungary, and I called it The Collapse of Managed Markets. What I said then was that the Soviet Union collapsed, and 25 years later, the United States economy is also collapsing. And to borrow a phrase from Professor Fekete, because of inherent economic contradictions. The United States economy, as we view it, is less than 100 years old. Our country was founded in 1776. But in 1913, we took the same system that Britain had put in its system a couple hundred years before, central banking, introduced credit-based, debt-based money into the system in place of savings-based money. The same year created the national federal income tax, which we never had before. Thomas Jefferson said, private bankers are more dangerous to the welfare of this country than standing armies. He warned that we too could become like England, as he saw them then. A nation indebted beyond its capacity to repay. And a nation that owes money is not a free people. This country fought that possibility off until 1913, when I think on Christmas Eve in the middle of the night they passed the Federal Reserve Act. Previously before that, same year they passed the national income tax. Never had that happen. And now the United States is the world's largest debtor, the largest deadbeat, and the chickens are coming home to roost. Marshall had us read George Ball's theory, or the theory, the situation that surrounded the controversy of the Vietnam War. What lay at the heart of the fear of Vietnam was something they called the domino theory. That if Vietnam became communist, the whole thing would collapse. One. You all know what a domino is. So we had a great debate in America. I grew up during that time. Some kids I knew died because they graduated in the bottom half of their high school class. What happened? Well, we embraced the domino theory. Nothing happened. Vietnam went communist. Nothing else happened. Nothing else happened. Wrong theory. Wrong theory. What's happening now is something that's rather extraordinary, and I believe with Bucky has never happened before in the history of our world. That we are on the edge of a crisis, as Bucky said, that's unprecedented. What I want to do here is I want to quote from another book. Bucky made his prediction 1980. This book was published in 1997, 11 years ago, by two historians, William Strauss and Neil Howe. And they had published a series of books on American history, detailing the changes that our country has gone through, and the crises that we faced, and the types of generations, sociological generations that rose up during these crises. And they broke them down into basically 4 types of generations and 4 types of crises, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Strauss and Howe published their book in 1997 called The Fourth Turning. And they said, another turning is up ahead. The first turning, the first great crisis in American history, was the Revolutionary War. The second great crisis, the second turning, Strauss and Howe called the Civil War. The third crisis was the twin emergencies of the Great Depression and World War II. And they said now another one is just up ahead. I want to remind you that what I'm going to read you was published in 1997. Quote, "The next fourth turning is due to begin shortly after the new millennium. Around the year 2005, a sudden spark will catalyze the crisis mood. Remnants of the old social order will disintegrate. Political and economic trust will implode. Real hardship will beset the land, with severe distress that can involve questions of class, race, nation, and empire. Yet this time of trouble will bring seeds of social rebirth. Americans will share a regret about recent mistakes and a resolute new consensus about what to do. The very survival of the nation will feel at stake. Somewhere before the year 2025, America will pass through a great gate in history, commensurate with the American Revolution, Civil War, and twin emergencies of the Great Depression and World War II. The risk of catastrophe will be very high. The nation could erupt into insurrection or civil violence, crack up geographically, or succumb to authoritarian rule. If there is a war, it is likely to be one of maximum risk and efforts. In other words, a total war." This was written 1996, published 1997. Another book published around that same period of time, I believe also 1997, it's called The Great Wave, by Professor David Hackett Fisher. Professor Fisher is the economic historian in this respect, wears many hats. Fascinating book. He said of all the records that we have in humanity, the receipts of what you bought at the store are the longest and the most complete that we have. We know the price of wheat, we know rents, we know price of eggs, going back millennia. And he said, what they've done, he said, this is not new. These things go in waves. You'll have a period of time where you have total stability, relative stability. But these periods of stability are interrupted by a like period of instability. An instability that Professor Fisher calls rising price waves, right? Price waves. All of a sudden, out of the blue, prices will start rising. And he says, now everybody has come to the table since this has been going on and we have universities with a reason. Demographics, economists, Kondratiev theorists, astrologers, everyone weighs in why this thing happens. He says that's not the point of his book. The point of his book is merely to note that they do. And what Professor Fisher noted was that, for example, you have the feudal period. We know them as the Dark Ages, all right? When churches ruled. Dark Ages. You should remember that. That's what they call them. And this lasted this requisite period of stability, and all of a sudden prices started rising. For no reason at all. Slowly. And as he said, during all such price waves, this period lasted from 80 to 120 years. And all price waves end in, Professor Fisher says, in economic collapse.